Welcome to the Voice of MPE, and this is the fifth episode in a series we're doing for MPE Talks on people in payments, where we've been bringing together industry leaders and subject matter experts to discuss topics such as people talent in payments, people development, leadership, and other. And I'm really pleased today that we're going to be talking on the subject of inclusion in the workplace in its broadest sense. So today it's all about inclusion, and I'm delighted to welcome to join me today 𝗂𝗲𝗄𝗏 from Project 𝗵𝗲 and Ursula Tavender from the Inclusive Workplace. And Joe, maybe I could turn to you first just to give an introduction to yourself and to Project 𝗵𝗲 and the journey you've been on, and then Ursula, I'll come to you.
Sure, thanks, Simon. And it's great to be a part of this. So yeah, we've known each other a while, haven't we? Because I've been in payments 12 years now. Was leading a payments processor called Global Processing Services, now Thread. And through that journey, we always had pretty progressive diversity inclusion approaches inside our organisation as we were building our business. I found it to be incredibly effective, and it was a differentiator for us. We had got as far as winning Best Diversity Inclusion Strategy at the Employment Excellence Awards across all industries in the UK. And then I specifically lent in on disability inclusion. And the more I did, the more it really brought another side of everybody out, and it brought a cohesion that just blew me away. And so I started speaking about what I'd done and making suggestions to others on the speaking circuit. The more I spoke, the more people said, "You've got to turn this into something, because this really matters to me, because actually my son, my daughter, my nephew," and that's the reality of 23% of the population having some form of disability. So off the back of that, we set about creating this initiative to accelerate disability inclusion in payments called Project 𝗵𝗲, and I'm delighted to be presenting and exhibiting at MPE in a couple of weeks.
Lovely, thank you, Joe. And Ursula, maybe come to you. You can tell us a little bit about yourself and also the Inclusive Workplace.
Thanks so much, Simon. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. So I'm Ursula Tavender, one of the co-founders of the Inclusive Workplace. And like you, Joe, I have a very personal sort of reason and kind of journey for, I hate the word journey, but you know what I mean, the way I came to this work. And for me, it all started with my personal circumstances. I was really struggling with an eating disorder in the workplace in my late 20s. And I was, trying to get better myself, and it didn't work. And after a long time of, deterioration, I promised myself that as soon as it started to impact my performance at work, I would get some help. And I went to my boss, and this is 15 years ago now, and she showed me the most inclusive leadership I have ever experienced. And she insisted that I work flexibly around psychiatric outpatient appointments before it got to the point where I needed to be treated as an inpatient, which is rapidly what we were hurtling towards. And so it kind of blew my world open that, you could work in a different way and that leadership could be that way. I will never, ever forget that act of empathy and compassion and flexibility and inclusivity. And it really did sort of start me on a very different path. So I've been in communications up until that point. I got well enough to miraculously have a baby, which was my intention for recovering. And then it was like, well, the next challenge is, how on earth do you continue with a career when you have a small child? And at the same time as my son was born prematurely, my husband was diagnosed with kidney failure and needed a kidney transplant. So we had chronic illnesses, mental illness and recovery, and small baby. And all of those things make a career quite challenging to continue with. So it kind of illuminated to me the desperate need for increased inclusion at work, and the challenges that employees and employers face in creating that culture where it is possible for people to stay and progress in their careers when life happens to them, like it does to us all in various different ways. And so I established a consultancy, which was back in 2016. And then joined forces with my wonderful co-founder, Madeline Cole, to form the Inclusive Workplace in 2019. And basically now what we do, we run events for people, leaders looking to build an inclusive workplace. So we connect them with best practice around what else is happening across sectors and in other areas and what other leaders are doing. Because we often find that leaders doing this work and in positions of influence and decision-making authority within organisations are often doing this work not alone necessarily, but within a very small team or on their own. And so they can feel like an island. Lots of them tell us that they feel quite isolated in the work that they're doing, and getting buy-in can be challenging. And that, I'm sure we'll touch on the challenges in this conversation, but we provide an opportunity for them to come together and share ideas and experiences and learn from each other. And we also consult. So 90% of my time is spent within organisations helping to make those changes happen that I so desperately needed and millions of others have desperately needed. So yeah, it's a purposeful place to be work-wise, and it's a privilege to get to do it and to talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. That's fantastic, Ursula. That was wonderful. Thank you both for those introductions. And maybe as a starting point and a kickoff, when we use the term inclusion, it's a very broad, topic area. And for some, it may be even a bit confusing about, what does it really mean? When we talk about inclusion, what should I be thinking on? What areas should I be focusing on? And maybe to kick off and come to you, Jo, on this particular area, what does inclusion mean to you, and what are you talking to business leaders about today when they say, well, okay, Jo, fantastic project Nemo, what is inclusion all about?
Yeah, I'll certainly leave Ursula to the definitions and training, because that's what she's been doing. But where I've been driving from is when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we so often look at the diversity bit first, and it's looking for and identifying people with different specific characteristics, and then figuring out how they are included and integrated into the whole. The beautiful thing about really focusing on disability inclusion is that it's absolutely not about identification of do you have a disability or not, which is where a lot of people start. It's absolutely about understanding the individual, understanding that human-to-human connection, and how can I make this experience of working here work and fit and right for you to thrive. And where that's so beautiful is if you can get that right for people with disabilities, you absolutely get it right for everyone, both in terms of every other diversity characteristic, but also all the bits in between, all of the temporary scenarios, or as Ursula mentioned, chronic illness, mental health challenges. People go through, life is life, where everybody is going through different circumstances at different points in their lives, and having an environment that is compassionate and keen to lean in and help with whatever the circumstances, isn't that sort of best for everyone? That's where I come from.
I'm totally with you on that, Jo. And we've always taken the stance that this is about everyone. It's, about making work better for everyone so that everyone can benefit. And I think, it's so important, isn't it, to make sure that our environments are conducive to the specific needs of specific characteristics and employee groups who need different things. But if we start, like you said, with this being about everyone and making everything better for everyone, then I think that's a really, the word beautiful is exactly the right word. I think that's a beautiful place to start.
And also, on your travels and as you're talking to, so maybe take prospects at this stage. So somebody's dialed 0800, the inclusive workplace, and wants to know a little bit more about what you're doing, but also how you can help them.
Yeah.
What are some, sort of 2 or 3 of the most frequent areas that you're talking to industry leaders about?
So one of the things that is a real cornerstone, and we've been doing increasing work around this in many different ways over the last few years, since COVID, I would say, is building psychological safety. And what I mean by that is building an environment where every person feels that it is safe for them to be themselves, to show up as themselves, to not have to hide who they are and their personal circumstances or any characteristics that might set them apart from anybody else. It's about feeling safe to speak up and challenge and take risks and make mistakes and all the things that need to happen for organisations to be successful. I think it's really important to mention that, the benefits to business when you take this approach are immeasurable. They are huge, because when you create an environment that is psychologically safe for every person, and you can do this at various levels of the organisation. It comes from the top, it comes from leaders, and a lot of the work that we do is around supporting leaders to role model those behaviours. And a big part of that, and I'm going to go off at a number of tangents now, but a big part of that is about talking about things as they're happening, rather than waiting for things to be finished and perfect and polished before we talk about them. And I think that a lot of leaders that we talk to struggle with the fact that they're moving from a world of work where they were expected to know all the answers to a world of work where it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to be a work in progress. And that actually we recognise that everybody is better for that, because it gives everyone at every level of the organisation permission to be a work in progress and to share their mistakes and all of that kind of great stuff, which makes business better. And I think that the role of psychological safety in an inclusive environment at work is a really great and powerful place to begin, because if you start with that intention to make it safe for everybody to speak up, to be themselves, then lots more great things can come from that in terms of inclusivity and in terms of the mechanics of how you teach people to model those inclusive behaviours. If you start with the intention to create a psychologically safe environment, then that's really, really powerful. So that's one area where we've been really doing a lot of work. One thing, like this week, for example, we are working with an organisation to build a set of company values and behaviours that support those values. And that is a huge act of creating a psychologically safe environment, because those employees are being asked to co-create the future culture of that organisation. They're being invited to contribute, they're being listened to, and their suggestions are being acted on in real time. And so that might not seem directly linked to an act of creating psychological safety, but it's huge. It makes a massive impact. So I don't think you necessarily always need to do the big stuff. I think simply asking your people what they think about what would make this environment more inclusive, what would make it work better for you, how can our leaders show up better for you, what would enable you to do your best work. Those kind of questions are really important. Another area that I just wanted to touch on very quickly, because I'm really conscious I want to talk to you, Jo, about what you think about all of this stuff, is flexible working. So another kind of really, really powerful accelerator of an inclusive environment is flexibility. I touched on it, in my own situation. Everybody benefits from flexibility. And I don't just mean working from home and in a hybrid way. I mean every form of flexing the way, how, when, where we work to meet people's needs. It's really critical for that to be reason agnostic. So we work with leaders and organisations and teams to have conversations about ways of working that work for them based on what their roles are and what they need to deliver. And that's critical because you can have a kind of company-wide policy and approach to flexibility, but when you take it down to a team level and ask people what they need to be successful, what they need to support their own well-being and their personal circumstances within the confines of what's possible within their roles and their delivery, that is another real accelerator of inclusion.
Jo.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you were talking about in terms of it all comes from culture and the leadership of culture from the top. And the analogy that I love to draw is that it's the comparison between insects and humans. Now, if you bear with me a moment, insects have a hard exoskeleton and they can't show any vulnerability. And any chink of their armour will lead to existential threat. We've created a society where, whether it's people in business and leaders in particular, they're wanting to demonstrate the same, that they've got this hard, infallible capabilities, to the extent that I'm speaking at an event tomorrow being led by Sarah Weller, who is the only director in the FTSE 100, exec or non-exec, with a disclosed disability. That cannot be right. It cannot be true that no one is prepared to share their own vulnerabilities, disabilities, whilst expecting their teams to share. It just doesn't compute. So if instead we could all be more human about this, so humans, we have a hard core, we have our spinal column, and then we're soft on the outside. We've got vulnerabilities, we show our true selves, but we are, strong in our core, strong in our values and what we stand for. But we are all fallible, we'll all make mistakes. And we did the whole values and behaviours exercise right when I first became CEO in 2018. And the one I was most proud of, you have all of the regulars in terms of integrity and flexibility with one as well. But the one that I always smiled as I said was courage. I said everyone in the business needs to be able to have courage, whether it's a developer having the courage to commit a line of code, or someone having the courage to call something out, or someone having courage to speak on a podcast, to speak at an event, to use their voice. And it was for the leadership team to create the appropriate guardrails to enable that person to complete their tasks, their work with confidence that they would have the underlying protection.
That's brilliant, Jo.
Why that? It's a bit of a sort of circuitous route, but it's absolutely relevant to this, because if the leaders can show vulnerability themselves, to lean into topics where we are uncomfortable. One of the biggest things that stops people leaning in on speaking about disability inclusion is they have a fear of saying the wrong thing. And because they've got a fear of, what do we talk about, disabled people or people with disabilities? Do we go and ask people to share their disabilities? Do you talk about disclosure versus sharing? All this kind of thing. And they tie themselves up in knots and then think the best thing is not to say anything at all. I went on this journey before disability with taking our company on a whole, black journey, specifically leaning in on a black agenda. And the first thing I needed to do, get really comfortable about as CEO, was being able to say the word black and to speak about a black agenda in a white on white conversation, because that was the only way that the conversation was really going to progress. And that takes real, courage, and it needs a vulnerability of saying, I'm going to get this wrong, but I need to work very carefully, with people, really leaning in, learning what you can, and going on a journey. You mentioned the word journey earlier. It is a journey, and we have to go on a journey together. And that's, authentically what needs to happen. And when you demonstrate that as a leader, people will buy in and go on that journey with you. And it's a beautiful thing. And that's what I'm now trying to help encourage other people to do. And sort of one of the most significant things that Project 𝗍𝗏 is looking to do is just help people get started on that journey. It's providing all the tips and tricks of options of how you can get started, regardless of your budget, your size of your company, your role. There are loads of different things you can do to just get started, and then you find what resonates within your company, and you pick up on something and move with that, and it's fantastic.
That's brilliant, Jo. Thank you, and Ursula, thank you for kicking that off as well. And I just wanted to make one observation on a previous podcast in the series we did. We were discussing how do you create and lead high-performing teams, and one of the areas that came up in the discussion was creating safe environments where people can contribute. And it's as you were both of you were talking, it's another variation on the word of inclusion. Including your whole team. Ursula, I love the way that that organisation was pulling in their employees to set values, to set concepts around inclusion and others. So I think that knits together extremely well. Now I want to change the topic a little bit to the practical side of things, and we talk a lot about hearts and minds. So in this area of inclusion, but it could by diversity, it could be other areas of our business lives. But there's a desire in the heart to have this done. How do we resolve this? How do we sort this? How do we make ourselves more equitable, more diverse, more balanced, more inclusive? And then there's the practical application of this. When we think about the structure of our workplaces, our culture, the makeup of our teams, or even at a leadership level, at a board level, how do we make this happen? So there's that hearts and minds challenge, willingness, but obstacles in the way. Mm-hmm. Ursula, maybe I could come to you and give a couple of thoughts from your side in this area.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is the intention, right? Because to me, inclusion work is never done, and it's always a work in progress. And I think if you can, I think it goes back to some of the things that I said earlier on about asking your people what inclusion means to them, listening to what they tell you and acting on it, and taking those sort of small steps towards progress, and communicating openly about what you're doing before it's perfect and finished. That sends a really strong message that this is something which is taken very seriously. It is a priority. And I think that's the first practical step that any leader can set that intention, because it's understandable that none of us have all the answers. We're all going to trip up and say the wrong thing. And if, as a leader, whether that is of 2 people in a team or in a global organisation of thousands of people, if you can role model that, I'm going to hold my hands up and I'm going to get it wrong, but my intention is to do better and to learn, and to be pragmatic and practical and proactive about how I do that, then other people will follow suit. And we've seen that time and time again in the organisations that we work with. I think policy has a role to play very much in this conversation. So if you can look at your policy frameworks and through an inclusivity lens and try to tweak them to make sure that they are relevant and valuable to as many people as possible. And that might mean increasing the scope of your policies. So lots of organisations are putting things in place like fertility leave, adoption leave. They're equalising parental leave. They're looking at extending bereavement leave and pet bereavement leave and compassionate leave, and all these kinds of different policies that mean that you can, again, you're building on that psychologically safe environment, and you're creating that culture where it's possible for everyone to disclose that information about themselves, and for them to be able to adjust the ways they work to meet their needs as life unfolds and deliver on their work. It may be that they never need to use them, but just the fact that they're in place is a huge aspect of this. I think that is a really practical piece of action that we can all take. I think another piece is about barriers in recruitment. So if you can expand where you search for talent by partnering with specialist organisations that access diverse talent pools, I think if you can publicise your path and work on the kind of employer branding side of things and talk openly and outwardly in the world about your path towards greater inclusivity, as you are training hiring managers and assembling more diverse interview panels intentionally where you can. If levels of diversity are not where they would like to be, then that's okay. It's the intention and the work in progress that matters. I think another really big piece of this puzzle is around cultural intelligence. So enabling people to understand each other better is always a great activity. So we work with a number of specialists in cultural intelligence who work proactively with organisations to increase their CQ, which is their cultural intelligence. And that's all about understanding not just global cultural differences, but, socioeconomic cultural differences as well. We are all culturally different. We all were raised in a different culture. And I think that is a huge aspect of building inclusivity. And then one final word from me on that is about benefits. So enabling as much choice and flexibility within your benefit structure as possible to make sure that it is as inclusive of as many people within your employee population as possible. So to include things like neurodiversity assessments and health assessments, the ability to have lots of different flexible benefits so that people can use them in ways that work for them. I think that is a huge part of this. Oh, and setting up employee resource groups. That was one thing that I really wanted to mention today, was around consulting your employees in and enabling them to feed their experiences and share their voice through the setup of employee resource groups is a really crucial way to leverage the existing diversity within your organisation and build on it and get the input of people with lived experience, which is really crucial to being able to access that information and that intelligence.
Lovely. Thanks, Ursula. Jo, we're coming into land now. We're almost up on our time, but Jo, I wanted to come to you for a final set of observations. Are we seeing progress, in terms of what you see and what you do every day with Project 𝗵𝗻? Are we progressing? Are you seeing light? And what does that look like?
So, are we making progress? Yes, definitely. It's a tanker to turn. So there's a lot of work to do, and a lot of the progress isn't necessarily visible in the first few months. I mean, we only launched Project 𝗵𝗻 in April last year. So in big picture, in 10 months, we've made a whole load of progress. How that then manifests, I think will take sort of another while, but we're definitely getting that first phase of feedback. So when you look at the adoption curve, we've had the early, the pioneers, the early relationships with partners who have followed up on our recommendations. They've attended the training that we've suggested. They've made improvements, and we're starting to get the feedback from them in terms of, we did this and we had that great feedback, and now we've just achieved disability confident level 2, or and so they're then starting to sort of build, expand out the what's being said. We found that even where people were making positive changes in their organisations, they weren't feeling comfortable talking about it externally, almost for fear of retribution for what they haven't done as yet. But we've managed to break that ice, and we're seeing more and more people speaking out about the improvements they're making, both internally and for their customers. And we think that there'll be a domino effect come out from all of this. Equally, working with the event organisers like 𝗵𝗶𝗺 themselves has been absolutely fantastic, because they are the shop window for the industry. And, we have to think, right, how inclusive does that appear to be? How many disabled people are we seeing, speaking or around the show floor or speaking up? And that we feel that shift is happening too. So it takes a couple of years. It's not all on us, but we were looking to be the fire starter, and that flame is burning for sure. The final thing I would say is, when you're looking specifically at what to do within an organisation, it's important to find where you can run with the tide of the organisation. There are many routes to actually getting going on a disability inclusion journey. There isn't a single, right, this is where to start first. Start with what resonates for your organisation. And that may well be, I always recommend the ERG approach as well, but it may well be just polling your organisation of saying, well, we were thinking about doing some lunch and learns, and let's bring in some external speakers to speak about things, whether it's neurodiversity, and you'll find it'll resonate with so many people from a children and that perspective, or something like the Sepsis Trust, where everyone can learn something that may well be life-saving in years to come. And that will sort of slowly bring some stories out. What's important to do is never make assumptions about your team members, never put team members on the spot. And even where there are team members with shared disabilities, they may not want that to be the focus of their organisation. If someone's going through a journey with a disease like multiple sclerosis or cancer, or they're blind or they're deaf, actually being in the workplace, they may be cherishing the fact that in the workplace they are just Sarah. They're not Sarah the deaf person. And actually, therefore, they may not want to be now focusing on, they're the disabled individual in the workspace. Therefore, let's make all of our initiatives in the workplace about us all learning about the deaf community and BSL, and learning about all disabilities from Sarah. It may be that Sarah would love to take the company on a journey, but it may be that they just want to be there and do their job, and they don't want anything extra. It's hard enough them doing an equivalent role as it is. So don't make any assumptions. Ask, and you never know what you'll find. You may find that there's somebody in the business who's grown up with a blind parent, so they have a real interest in vision impairment, and that sets a ball rolling where your teams are looking into that topic. It could be anything as a start point, but the key is to just get started.
That's fantastic, Jo. Thank you so much. And Ursula, thank you. We've got to draw to a close now, so thank you to our audience. Firstly, thank you, Ursula and Jo. Thank you to our audience as well for listening to this episode of 𝗵𝗶𝗺 Talks. Jo and I will be at the 𝗵𝗶𝗺 event in Berlin in a few weeks' time, actually. So please do look us up. Please do join us there. Please do come and see the People in Payments panel that we will be doing on day 2. Thank you, everybody.